the Happy Lawyer Project. I'm your host, Akoma Moronu, and I created this show to help lawyers find happiness in life with a law degree. Together with my guests, we provide the knowledge, insight, skills, inspiration, and encouragement you need to find your happy. On today's show, I chat with Josh Holt from the BigLaw Investor. Josh is a New York BigLaw associate with a personal finance blog that's focused specifically on the issues faced by young lawyers. Josh shares his thoughts on why lawyers continue to be under-accumulators of wealth, resources for lawyers wanting to get a handle on their personal finance, and his strategies for managing his career while pursuing his passion for personal finance. Let's get to it. Welcome back to the Happy Lawyer Project. I am so excited to have Josh on the show today.
I'm happy to be here.
Well, Josh, I'd be so happy if you could just start by sharing a brief description of who you are and what you do.
Sure. I'm a private equity M&A associate in BigLaw in New York. And then on the side, I have a project called the BigLaw Investor, which is a personal finance blog aimed at lawyers.
So I just stumbled across your blog for the first time, which is amazing. I love your blog. You have such good content, and I love personal finance, so that's not a compliment to take lightly. And as an initial question, I'd be interested to know, how do you find time to run this blog on top of being a BigLaw associate?
Well, probably the same way that you find the time to run this podcast, right? I mean, we must have something in common. I guess I would say that I find the time mainly in the mornings. I mean, you find that if you get up at 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning, you can get a lot done before you go to work. And so that's pretty much my strategy, that and delegating as much as I can, because it's always helpful to have a team with you. So that's pretty much what I do.
That's, I think, one of the things people don't appreciate enough about BigLaw in New York. And one of the things I miss the most about BigLaw in New York is kind of the later start time.
Private equity is definitely good for that, because private equity is all about entertaining the clients in the evening. And so I think most private equity shops kind of don't start until 10 a.m. I mean, like I said, I'm up at 5:30 or 6 o'clock. And so that gives me several hours as a runway before I have to start my day.
That's so great. I totally miss it, because I similarly I think being in New York, we did a lot of bankside work. And so we often were late into the night as well. And I rarely got into the office before 10. And I think the transition here to Dallas, people are in, by 8:39. And I'm like, if I get in by 9:30, I'm pretty proud of myself.
Yeah.
So you recently wrote an article for Law Practice Today about lawyers being under accumulators of wealth. And I'm fairly familiar with that term from the book Millionaires Next Door. But for those who haven't read the book, could you explain what that term means and why you think lawyers tend to be under accumulators?
Sure. So an under accumulator of wealth, I think they call them UAWs in the book. It's just that when you look at people that are accumulating money relative to their income, and you say, like, what's their net worth? What's their income? Where should they be? So you have two categories, the under accumulators and the over accumulators, and lawyers and doctors too. In fact, a lot of professionals fall into the under accumulators of wealth section. And so I didn't come up with that term. That's, something that the authors found when they were doing their surveys. And they spent a lot of time asking, why is that the case? Like, why is it that doctors and lawyers, people with these high salaries, are not at a net worth level that you would expect someone to be with an income like that? And I think the answer is that, it's probably personal to each individual, but we get caught in a lot of things. There's high spending because there's a lot of pressure to keep up with your peers. We have obviously high student loan debt burden, so that doesn't really help your net worth when you're spending a lot of your money paying off student loans. But I think it's really a problem, and I think that it's an interesting thing to be aware of when you enter the legal profession, or like I said, any profession in general, and you realize that just because you have a high income doesn't mean that you're actually going to be wealthy, because those aren't the same things.
That's a fantastic point, and I think that a lot of lawyers come into BigLaw thinking that number is really big and make a lot of bad decisions kind of in that first year that sets them off the wrong way.
Yeah.
No.
I couldn't agree.
Yeah.
That's so true. It's all about the first year. It's probably even those decisions that you make right before the first year that end up setting you up, because, most lawyers, maybe they worked for 1 or 2 years in between law school, So they might have a little bit of experience in managing an income. But if you're going to start in BigLaw particularly, you're going to start at $180,000 and it's going to be your first job. You haven't had an income for such a long time, you're immediately going to inflate your lifestyle up to that level just because it seems natural. You're going to take that money, you're going to divide it by 12, and you're going to say, okay, this is what I have each month, and I'm going to put this much towards each area. And before you know it, you've basically spent that entire income. And there's nothing really wrong with that, except for when you look at then what part of that income is being spent towards lifestyle. And unfortunately, a lot of lawyers will make the mistake of spending, what they think is a reasonable percentage of that money towards lifestyle without realizing that they maybe need to save a little bit more because they're starting, let's say, 5 or 6 years behind their peers when it comes to saving for things like retirement and stuff like that. So I couldn't agree with you more that it's really that first year that kind of sets the tone for whether or not a lawyer is going to become wealthy over the long run.
And I think it doesn't help. I was just thinking about the fact that lawyers get paid that salary as summers, and your lifestyle as a summer is not sustainable as an associate. And because I think a lot of people do end up saving a lot of money as summers, and they're going to all the dinners, they're having the big lunches, and they don't realize they're not paying for any of that,
Right. It's pretty easy to save money when all the entertainment's provided by the firm.
Exactly. And we don't, you don't take out for social security, you don't take out for benefits. There's all these, the taxes, all these things that add up after the fact. People don't take into consideration. So I see a lot of people come in as first years kind of getting an apartment that's a little bit more expensive than what they should have gotten and thinking they're going to get that same paycheck they got as a summer.
Yeah. And I mean, I just want to say that it's not about judging people too and the lifestyle choices that they make. And so I never tell someone that, oh, it's an apartment that you shouldn't get or that, leasing this car that you shouldn't have. It's just that it's all about choices, right? So you have to decide, I have a certain amount of money and I'm going to be able to allocate it accordingly. And there are different goals that I have and different things that I want. And then, you're going to have to make those allocations correctly. The problem is, I think that a lot of new lawyers think that they can, contribute, let's say, $18,000 a year to a 401k, which is definitely not a bad start. And then maybe that's it for retirement. And then they don't really understand that means that they may be working until they're 65. And maybe that lawyer doesn't want to work until they're 65. And so I think if they take the time to think about it and they realize that, well, wait a minute, what have some other people done? Maybe if I decide to live in, this much cheaper apartment, then I can, have enough money that I could retire when I was 45 or 50 or something like that. And so it's about those choices and those trade-offs. And really what's important is that you know what choice you're making when you make it. Because if what you really want is a very fancy apartment to come to at the end of the day, then okay, if that's what makes you happy. But I would ask you to second guess that. Is that really what makes you happy?
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. It definitely is about the intentionality and knowing what you're choosing and the impact of what you're choosing. So let's go right into it. How should young lawyers, besides their 401k and their loans, which I think most people kind of can get their heads around, how else should they start investing in the early years?
Well, I mean, I really I don't think that they need to worry too much about investing. I mean, investing is actually fairly easy, despite what the financial services industry would kind of have and you can get away with just investing in low fee index funds from Vanguard and kind of call it a day. I mean, you can go with the Vanguard total stock market, and then you've basically invested in every company that exists in the US. And so they're all working for you. They're all working to make you rich. So the investing part really isn't that difficult. I think what people need to do when they first get started is just becoming kind of familiar with personal finance and the terms. I like to say, you don't have to be fluent in the language of personal finance, but you do need to be able to converse in it. You need to know the vocabulary. And so really, I think the most kind of bang for your buck would be at the beginning, just to maybe read a overall personal finance book. There's a lot of good ones out there that are kind of just general advice. And you start to kind of become aware of these things. You start to learn about the different things that you could be doing, the retirement accounts and that kind of stuff. The investing is, a lot of lawyers do want to jump into that. In fact, that's actually a problem that lawyers have. It's called the swinging for the fence thing. And so a lawyer maybe will start and they'll realize that they're a little bit later in their career and they think that they're probably smarter than the average population, which is probably true. And so they think, well, I'm going to be able to figure out something that's going to return 10 times. And so I'm going to hit a home run. And so it's not uncommon at all for a lawyer, again, a doctor, all kinds of professionals to maybe get started during their first or second year of a career and kind of make these outsized bets because they think that they're going to be able to do well. So again, I would kind of slow down the whole thought about like, what do I need to do when it comes to getting started with investing, and think, well, what do I need to do when I get started with personal finance?
Those are really great points. And I'm a huge index fund supporter as well. I've kind of gone that way in the last couple of years. And I love personal finance books. And so I'd be interested to know what you would recommend as good starter books for people who want to dive into personal finance for the first time.
Well, have you read The Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins? I mean, he's one of the big kind of personal finance bloggers. I figured it's something you'd come across.
Yes, I have it on my list. It's one I haven't read actually. But Jim Collins, right? Recently he was on Farnoosh. He had a new book come out.
Yeah, he's only written one book, actually, as far as I know. It's called The Simple Path to Wealth. And he's not a financial author or kind of a personal finance guru necessarily, except for the fact that he's got a very successful personal finance blog, and he is part of the early retirement movement. And so I think that he maybe retired in like the 80s or the 90s, substantially earlier than some of the early retirement blogs that are popular as of now. And so he decided to put a lot of the ideas from his blog into kind of this overall general book called The Simple Path to Wealth. And so it's great. You should definitely read it. I think even people that know a lot about finance will still find it refreshing because it kind of covers the whole range of personal finance issues, and it doesn't do it in a way that's complicated, obviously, with a name like The Simple Path to Wealth. But then another good book is Jim Dolly wrote. He's the author of the White Coat Investor blog. He has a book. I forget exactly what the name of the title is, but I believe it's called like The White Coat Investor's Guide to Personal Finance or something like that. But it's also a very good general book. It's written for young doctors. And so there's parts of it that are maybe not as applicable to lawyers, specifically when they talk about things like residency and the 4 years that they have in residency, and then, the time period before they become attendings. But it's still a great overall book and guide to kind of getting your feet wet with personal finance and thinking about all the different areas that you need to think about.
Those are great suggestions. And I haven't read either of those, so I will definitely add them to my list. I love to consume personal finance books, and I actually haven't read one in a while. So I've been meaning to read The Simple Path to Wealth, and I'm pretty sure I heard the interview with Mr. Money Mustache, and that's what got it on my list. And I love Mr. Money Mustache, so I'm sure the book is fantastic.
Yeah, it's great. You should definitely check it out. You're going to like it.
So you clearly have this passion for personal finance, and you've been practicing law for a while now. So why have you decided to pursue this on the side instead of transition into personal finance?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I never really thought about it, actually. It's not, I like what I'm doing. I enjoy practicing law, which I know is a little bit of an anomaly, but that's probably why I'm still in BigLaw after all these years. I enjoy it, and it's going really well. So the practice of law is my main focus. And then the personal finance side is just a hobby. It's something I'm interested in. And I don't think it would be something that I would want to do full time, because then it would probably turn it into a job. And then maybe I wouldn't kind of be as interested in it. I think right now it's more fun as a side hobby because it allows me to meet interesting people such as yourself and the personal finance community, which is just this great community that's out there. And it's also been really good for connecting me with other lawyers. And I see the BigLaw Investor and the stuff that I'm doing is kind of like a way for me to give back to some of the younger lawyers that are kind of coming up through the ranks. And so that's really how I see the project. But never thought about going into personal finance, like becoming a financial advisor or anything like that.
I think that's a wonderful perspective, because so many lawyers think it's either or, and that if they can't make money off something they like, that it's not worth pursuing because they don't really have time for it, or they need to go all in. And I think it's really great that you've kind of carved out this time to do something that you enjoy, just to give back, and because you enjoy it and you aren't putting any pressure on it to become your job or to grow it into this empire,
Right. No, definitely not. I mean, maybe if you saw my pro bono hours, which are very, very low, you'd feel a little bit differently. But, this is my pro bono project. This is where I spend my time. Because, in order to do anything, pro bono work or practice law or just really anything, you have to be really interested in it, right? You have to want to do it. You have to want to wake up at 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning and say like, okay, this is fun. Like, I'm excited to do this. I'm really interested in this. And so personal finance for me, it sounds like it's that way for you too. Maybe happiness, like those kind of things. It's just something that I'm interested in. And so I think, people as they go through their lives are kind of always figuring that stuff out, right? And finding what they are or who they are and what things that they like to do and love and stuff. And so for me, personal finance is something that I've always really been interested in. And it was only about a year ago that I said, well, why don't I just start kind of writing down my thoughts and see if I can get a community of lawyers together and we can kind of learn from each other, because there's a lot of different experiences, a lot of different paths. As you know, lawyers don't all start in big law. A lot of them start at the lower end of that bimodal salary distribution curve. And so there's a lot of kind of room for different voices to have a conversation about personal finance when it comes to being a lawyer. And I hope that the site becomes kind of a place for that.
I recently went to a conference for solo practitioners. I have no interest in becoming a solo practitioner. It's not something I've ever considered really. So, but who knows, maybe I will one day. But I was in town for something else. It was in Austin, and a friend of mine, Nicole Abood, was speaking. So I thought it would be fun to check her out live. And it was really interesting just to be in a room with just a different group of lawyers who had just taken a totally different path from the one that I was on, and just hearing them talk about their practice, their business, and their thoughts on money was really fascinating and eye-opening for me. And I would encourage people, I think, to do more things where they get to meet interesting people and talk about the practice of law that's different from their own practice. Because I think some of the most unhappy lawyers, or the unhappiest lawyers, are people who kind of get stuck in their bubble and they're only seeing law practiced a certain way and they don't like the way they're seeing it practiced, and they don't realize that there's just so many options out there and there are so many different, not just perspectives on the practice of law, but just different ways to approach the exact same practice.
There definitely are. There's a lot of different paths that lawyers take. I mean, I couldn't agree more with that. I think that, law school, the old joke, right, is that people graduate with the humanities degrees and then they say, I couldn't think of anything else to do, so I became a lawyer. But I think there's some truth in that. And so a lot of people come from a lot of different perspectives into the law. And then, as we know, the job prospects for lawyers is kind of across the board. So there are people that graduate law school and there are people that want to be solo lawyers. There are people that didn't want to be solo lawyers but become solo lawyers. There are people that probably didn't want to go into big law, honestly, but then they said, well, how else am I going to pay off these student loans? And so then they maybe forced themselves to go work for a big firm, thinking that they can do it for 2 or 3 years or something like that to pay off their loans. So it's a lot of different paths and a lot of perspectives, and that actually makes it more interesting.
Yeah. But you have to be willing to you have to be open to learning from these other experiences, and to really, because I think there are people out there who hear you say it's really interesting and are like, why? Why is that interesting? It just seems like a lot of unhappy people just sorting their life out. But I think amongst the masses, you find the ones who've really figured it out and the ones who've managed to do it with a smile on their face. And that's what makes me so happy about this podcast, is it's kind of created a platform for me to have those conversations and share it with people. But you don't need to have a podcast to have these conversations or to find these people. But I can't have you on without transitioning to a topic that I love to talk about, and I know that you also share an interest in, and that's Tim Ferriss. I believe that we're both fans, and he tends to actually come up on this podcast quite a bit. But I would be interested in knowing, what was your introduction to Tim Ferriss, and why did it resonate with you?
Yeah, I've heard you mention Tim Ferriss a couple of times on your podcast, and huge fan of Tim Ferriss. And my first introduction was actually in law school. So I was in law school when the 4-Hour Work Week came out. And like Tim always says, it's got that infomercial title that really kind of draws you in, right? What is the 4-Hour Work Week and how can I get it? And so during law school, I can't remember exactly when, whether it was a summer or during a semester, but they have a lot more free time. And I saw that title and I said, I want to buy that book and figure that out. And so that's how I got into Tim Ferriss. And I'm definitely a huge fan. I'm curious, how did you find Tim Ferriss?
I have absolutely no memory. And that's the thing that's is so amazing to me is that it's come up so many times. People always ask me this question. And I think my husband must have picked up the book and it was laying around our house because I vaguely remember the book just being in my life one day. And I know I didn't buy it. So I guess I was supposed to be a Tim Ferriss fan. Like, like he was just put in my path. But I think that lawyers tend to have very strong feelings about the book and they tend to love it or hate it because it's so out there. And a lot of lawyers are traditionalist and have a very traditional idea of what it means to be professional and to work and to earn. And the book kind of turns all of that on its head. So I do get people on the show who hate Tim Ferriss.
I'm not surprised. I come across a lot of people that hate Tim Ferriss as well. But my approach to Tim Ferriss has always been just take what you like and discard the rest. And I think that's also his approach, which is why I'm usually surprised that there are people that feel strongly, kind of a hatred towards Tim Ferriss, because he has a ton of ideas and a ton of different experiments and all kinds of things that he's pursuing at any given moment. And I would say, I don't know, maybe 50% of it's not interesting to me. But that doesn't mean that the stuff that he ends up focusing on that I am interested in isn't really interesting, because whenever he focuses on something, he really puts a magnifying glass to it. And he does the deep dives. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why his podcast is so successful, because he'll have, 1.5 hour, maybe even 2 hour interviews with very specific and people that are experts in a small niche. And so if you're interested in that niche, or if you're, sort of interested in it, it's really cool to have a 2 hour deep dive. And so I think he's great. I mean, he's definitely been inspirational to me. One of the first things that I learned from him from the 4 hour work week, and I think is probably the number one skill for lawyers to learn, is delegation. Because delegation is not something that you learn in high school as an undergrad or in law school. We're not delegating to anyone. And when you become a lawyer, particularly if you're at a big law firm, but even if you're not, even if you're a solo practitioner, you have to learn how to delegate tasks and assignments. And it's very difficult, I think, for most lawyers to delegate anything, because they're just, type A personality. So they think, I can do it myself. I can do it faster. And so you really have to teach yourself that it may take somebody else 3 hours to do something that you could do in an hour, but that frees up your hour. So now you have a free hour, which you can focus on something else. And Tim Ferriss and his 4 hour work week 2007 mind frame wasn't talking about lawyers and delegation when he was writing about outsourcing services to India and those kind of things. But I think those ideas have been very influential to me as a practicing lawyer. And I think that they're really powerful.
That's a great point. And I would be interested to know, what's your philosophy about what to delegate? How do you decide how much and what to delegate, especially in light of kind of your billables and trying to make sure you're getting enough work? I think that's something that lawyers feel very conflicted about, is not delegating all of their work away.
I try to delegate everything. If it can be delegated, then I want to do it. Because there's no way, you can't move up unless you're delegating what you're doing. I mean, the whole point, and this is definitely true from my perspective as a big law associate in the big law career, is that you're trying to make yourself obsolete. So if you're the first year associate, you want to get to a point that next year where the first year start, and you want to make what you're doing, your role in what you're doing, obsolete, so that they can't use you for that anymore. You can't do closing checklists anymore because you've graduated and you moved on to secretary certificates or whatever the case may be. And so that's what I'm always trying to delegate things. And it's hard. It's a really hard skill. That's why I think it's a really important skill for lawyers to learn. And even first year associates, I always tell them, can learn about delegation, because they often have access to things like word processing, let's say, or, their assistants. And so you always, or you're lucky in the sense that as a big law associate, you start off at such a place where you have the ability to delegate certain tasks. And so you have to start teaching yourself how to do that, because you're going to be really bad at it at first. And the work product that you get back is probably not going to be that good. And what you have to learn is that that's your fault, not the person who did it for you. And so you have to learn how to delegate and how to be specific. And so I'm trying to delegate everything. It sounds like you're in the same boat.
Oh my gosh, that makes me so happy that you say that, because I completely agree. And I, in fact, think it's almost an ethical obligation that we have as lawyers to delegate work down to the cheapest person who's capable of doing it. Because the client shouldn't be paying me to do work. that somebody below me could be doing.
Great
and
point.
I also think that from a business perspective, that is how the people below me learn. And it's my job as their supervisor or the associate above them to train them on that work. And I am kind of holding them back by not giving them the opportunity to do it and screw it up. So I completely agree. And I don't believe in doing any work that's below my level because I think it's bad for me, it's bad for the firm, it's bad for the client.
I completely agree with that. I mean, that's a great point about the ethical obligation of delegating down. I mean, you cost whatever you cost, and that's more money than somebody that is a junior associate costs. And so it's not really fair to the client to be doing that work for yourself when it could be done by a junior associate. One of the most interesting things I found too, and I'm curious if you've seen this in your career, is that at a certain point, maybe when you become the fifth year, let's say, you actually start delegating up as well. So you're delegating down and up. And that's because, the partners are too busy doing various things. And so they kind of rely on you for figuring out what's important for them and then focusing their attention on it and saying, okay, this is what we need you to do. This is the partner level task. And so I think like I said, you can delegate as much as you can, and you can do it both directions.
Oh my goodness, that makes me, you can't even see how big I'm smiling right now, because I think that that's a really hard part of kind of the mid-level role, or the senior associate role even, is the delegating up and knowing when not to just spin your wheels. Because I think sometimes people fall into this trap of thinking that it's some sort of test that they're supposed to like figure this thing out that's above their level. And often what the partner really wants is just for you to flag it to their attention so they can give you an easy answer or they can handle it at their level. And it does take some judgment to know when that is, but that's the kind of judgment that helps you move through the ranks.
Absolutely. And it all came from Tim Ferriss. So what's not to like?
Fantastic. Well, I'm looking at the time and I'm seeing that we have to wrap up. So I just wanted, if you could just share a little bit about what listeners could look forward to if they head over to BigLaw Investors, and kind of the best ways for people to follow you on social media and learn what you do.
Sure. So the website is just www.biglawinvestor.com. I publish posts on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So it's a lot. It's kind of a fire hose, I suppose, but you don't have to drink from the entire fire hose. You can just kind of dip in and out and find the good ideas, much like we were just talking about with Tim Ferriss. And then I'm pretty active on Twitter. I would say that's really the only social media channel that I've engaged full force, and that's at BigLaw Investor. And that's it, but mainly the website. That's the best way.
Great. And I will include all of those links in my show notes so people who are out on a run or in their cars can check out the website for those. And before I let you go, I would love if you could answer the last question, which I ask everyone. Since you've been in Big Law for a while, I'd love your thoughts on what you think is the difference between those lawyers that have found happiness and those that remain unhappy.
Well, I love this question. I mean, I absolutely love this question. I love the focus kind of the podcast, because secretly that's kind of what my blog is about, is a little bit of injecting some happiness into lawyers' lives. And I think taking care of your finances is one of the ways that you can kind of become happy as a lawyer. And I wish all lawyers were happy. And I guess to specifically answer your question, I would say that, happiness comes from inside you. So obviously it's going to be a personal decision and to be happy. And so you really kind of have to figure that part out. And you have to figure out, what is it about my mental state that's looking at these circumstances and deciding that I'm happy or unhappy. I mean, there's a common or a phrase that I'm familiar with about, in the absence of your judgment about whether something is good or bad, it wouldn't be either, right? It would just be happening, whatever it was. So I think that, that's how I look at happiness, is that I'm the one that's deciding whether or not this is a good situation or not.
That's such good advice. And I hope that people take it to heart. And I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing your story. And I look forward to catching up in person at FinCon this year.
That sounds great. Yeah, we'll be in your hometown. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me for the Happy Lawyer Project podcast. Please head over to my website, www.thehappylawyerproject.com, for more information from today's show. While you're there, I'd love it if you'd leave me your thoughts on the show. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, or follow me on Instagram. If you've enjoyed the show, please share it with your friends. And don't forget to head over to iTunes to subscribe and review the show. As you know, each rating helps more listeners find the show and helps me get awesome guests on here for you guys. If there's anyone you'd like me to have on the show, or if you'd like to be on the show, head over to my website and let me know, or send me an email at Akoma, OKEOMA, at thehappylawyerproject.com. A special thanks to everyone who's left a review, sent me an email, or reached out to me in any way. I appreciate you. Thank you again for spending this time with me, and if you would like to learn more about working in your gift and living your passion, head over to the website for a free gift. Until next time, bye!